Hello there, and Buendia. Welcome to our coverage of 100 Years of Solitude on Netflix. I'm Steve Barnes from the Sweet Child of Time podcast and Introvoid. Don't forget Introvoid. And I'm here with your host from one of my stories. You already heard her laughing at me. She's my co-host and my time travel pal from one of my stories. It's Lindsey Dunn. Ahoy there, Lindsey.
Buendia.
Buendia.
I thought you were going to say, I am Jose Arcadio, and I am Jose Arcadio. And
Oh, sure. I could have gone that direction. But yeah, I was just really pleased to learn that the name of this family, Buendia, literally translates to good day. So I thought that was a really appropriate way to, start our discussion. Good day, Lindsey.
Good day, good evening, good morrow, sir.
Who knows what it is when our listeners are at. But yeah, we're talking about 100. I got ready to say 100 days of summer. It's on my mind a lot. 100 Years of Solitude. This is a great book turned into a series. And Lindsey, it was really your idea to a long time ago to get us into it. I'm going to first, before I shoot to you, I will say that this was required reading for Charlotte a couple years ago. She went through a Spanish immersion program through all 4 years of high school, and she was assigned 100 Years of Solitude to read, as a class. They assign books in English class. That's what they do, or Spanish class, I should say. And around that exact same time, you told me, I think this show just got greenlit for Netflix. I'm hearing about it now. I think that, you would really like this. Maybe next year when it comes out, we can podcast about it. So, in retrospect, what I'm thinking is, 'cause at the time I was like, wow, it's a really neat coincidence. Now I'm thinking, yeah, Charlotte's teacher saw the same article you did about 100 Years of Solitude coming to Netflix. And she was like, I'm going to make my students read this book. So when the show comes out, they'll have a heads up on it and, be part of it. That was just my suspicion. Yeah. Why did you initially think that this would be something that I would be into?
Well, it'll be maybe more clear when we get into the recap, but It just struck me that, okay, so I've heard of this book before. It's considered a supreme achievement in world literature. It was published in 1970. It's 422 pages long.
Yeah, brother.
I'm fairly certain, and I should have looked this up before, but I've seen it in movies before. People will be reading this book, and it's supposed to tell you something about their character. And I'm always like, well, what's it telling me? Because I've never read this book before.
Sure.
But, I feel like they did start advertising about this a long time ago. I don't know when it was that I saw this, but I just saw there was this trailer and it just kept saying coming to Netflix sometime in 2024. And of course, it dropped the very last month. But as I watched the trailer, we're sort of we like to talk about the liminal space, right? And we're here, we've watched 1899, we've watched and recapped Dark. We're waiting for that Bo and Yantia, something is killing the children, perhaps to drop one day. So we're always looking for a project or what else could we recap in between. And when I watched the trailer, I thought, look at this. There's a woman with putting her hand on a woman's belly. There's an Ouroboros symbol in this. There's this generational curse, maybe. There's these cousins that weren't supposed to get married, and the repeating of time and the repeating of mistakes and human pride and all of this stuff, and the 7 generations of the Buendia family. So it reminded me of Dark watching this trailer. And I remember going to a Reddit thread and in our our Dark Facebook group as well, I was saying, has anybody considered that this show is like Dark? And people were like, no, it has nothing to do with Dark. And then I started pointing out from the trailer and from some different sources all the connections I found. And then people were like, well, yes, so it was, and when you're just seeing the trailer, right? So you don't know what it's really going to be like. And we'll talk more about whether it is like Dark or not and if they have anything in common. But I just thought it sounded like something that touched on things that we have talked about before. So it might be interesting, although, it was to be determined, whether it was going to be anything we would actually be interested or not.
Hmm.
So now it's time for me to
Hmm.
turn to you, Steve, and
Sure.
turn it back to you and say, well, why did you agree to it? Because this doesn't exactly ring your cup of tea. So what about it convinced you to give it the old college try?
Sure. Well, I limited myself to what I can cover because it has to relate to time in some way. So it passed the test there. And then I also knew that Charlotte was reading it. So, my thought was, maybe Charlotte will want to come on and give us her opinion about it, which I might hold her to that in one of our future episodes. Heather as well, because now my wife Heather is a fan. I don't know. Like I watched the trailer as well. And then like I read the broad overview of the book. And then Charlotte told me what she knew about it. And it seemed, it passed the interest test for Steve Barnes. You mentioned something about how they were pushing the fact that this show was coming out. And Netflix has been doing this thing in the past 2 years where this show in Colombia is like the biggest production that anybody has ever done in Colombia. Netflix is doing this. Let me get the numbers while I'm talking about it. They added a $52 million economic boost to Colombia, employing 900 people. They built their set over the course of 133 acres, which is like about 2 mile stretch. So they were really predominant in Colombia. Not just that, they were doing the same thing in Australia for this show called Territory. I knew about this because Greta Vandenbrink, who came on Sweet Child of Time, she plays a character, Annie, on Territory. Territory has pretty much the exact same footprint. It's the biggest production ever done. Netflix is doing it. They're putting all this money into it. They're only casting people from Australia. It's a huge casting crew, economic boost. So I imagine they're going to be doing this in other countries, or they already have done this in other countries. And for this case, it was 100 Years of Solitude, which I think was a solid choice because another reason I like this too is because it's a magical book. It's a fantasy. This is a tall tale. So like if you're watching this show, especially this first episode, the logistics don't exactly line up. A lot of shows, logistics, you got to kind of have that detachment from reality slightly. This one, you have to have a huge detachment from reality because this is like a tall tale, basically. This family is like a fable, similar to like Paul Bunyan or something like that. So we got to look at it from that lens as we're watching this. So like when you say, where did all this stuff come from? How did they make this village so fast? It's a tall tale. That's why, Steve Barnes. Um, but I'm glad that they're only going to make this 2 seasons. They've already committed to 2 seasons. They're already filming season 2. So it's just going to be 2 seasons of the show. We got 8 episodes now. And then I guess we'll come back when they do the other 8 episodes and we'll recap it too. And it is a big leap of faith when we start doing a show and we're not sure if we're going to like it or not. We haven't come upon anything yet that I hate. I hope you don't hate this. We've dodged some bullets, but I think this was a solid choice. I wouldn't pick something that didn't look appealing to me.
Mm-hmm. So you've mentioned the book several times,
Mm-hmm.
Steve. So, we can't assume, or I can't assume, I haven't read the book. I can't assume that the book has really anything to do with the show. That could be completely different. So you've read it,
Mm-hmm.
and Charlotte's read it, and you've heard what she thinks. So is there anything you want to tell us about the book that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, I got to admit it's a what is it, DNF in the book world. Did not finish. Okay, this book has no dialogue, so it doesn't really flow very well. For me, for other people that might be what their preference is, but so all the character interactions and all the dialogue we're going to see in this show, it's all show creation. Other than that, all of the dialogue that you hear in the show from narrators and from like, the omniscient person reading the script, that's straight from the book. Everything we're seeing on screen is straight from the book. The book has a lot more detail to it. I got through maybe the first third of the book. So like everything that I read has pretty much been represented on screen here. And I don't see how anybody could argue how they're, at least from what I've read, I've only read the first third. So I don't know the rest of it. I need to catch up on the rest of it before the next season, I suppose, so I can speak to the validity of it. And this thing was shot beautifully. They spent a lot of money on it. And this book is like like I said, there's no dialogue. So they spend all this time describing things. So what you're seeing on screen is basically what they described in the book. They did a good job of doing that.
And I think, accuracy is important.
Sure.
So technically, I think it's actually only one season that Netflix is claiming this is 2 parts. So this is 100 Years of Solitude Part 1,
Okay.
and the next thing is Part 2. So they're calling it one season, just like, Cobra
Oh,
Kai season 6 was in 3 parts. So I don't want
16
Netflix.
episodes though.
I don't want Netflix to come after us. Likewise, I don't want literature experts to come after us. So I'm going
I'll
to
take them.
talk about what genre this is. You mentioned tall tale. I think that's a fine quality, but specifically, this genre is called magical realism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's specific. A lot of people. This is where we could get some fights. We could get some letters in. Write us at sweetchildoftimepod@gmail.com. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
If you want to argue about this, but you can get really hot discussions about, not as in like hot as in sexy hot as in like
Like the show
heated.
is.
Yes. Heated discussions about what can and cannot be magical realism, because this genre came out of Latin American literature, those writers. So a lot of times this term is applied to other writers from other cultures, and people will get very upset about this and say, in order for it to be magical realism, it has to come out of a South American or Latin American author. And the reason for that is because a lot of this is tied into politics and the culture of South America and what is igniting these authors to write about, it's a political discussion. It's letting you know something about their culture, about the colonialism that's happened in their culture, which is very much, plays into this show too.
Sure. I was going to say.
Yeah. The characteristics of magical realism is that it's not a fantasy, because a fantasy is like a world where now you can have like different kinds of fantasy, right? Like you can have the epic fantasy where it's all in another made up world. And then you can have the like low fantasy, like Harry Potter, where it's our world, but there's magic around the corner, but with magical realism, it's like a touch of magic in there. Things aren't necessarily explained. Like there's this scene in the show where they're sitting and talking about how they're going to move to the ocean, and all of a sudden their feet are immersed in water. But it's not real. They're not really in the water. They're just imagining it, or you might say maybe because they're already thinking about it, their mind is already at the ocean, so they
Sure.
show that. But yeah, so I think we just named that this genre is magical realism, and it's a cool genre, but usually the stories are really complicated. There's a lot of generational trauma involved in these stories, and I think it's a fun genre. It's something I didn't read at all until college, and yeah, so I just wanted to make sure we get that term in there so that no English teachers come after me.
Sure. And you said that, people can come at us and email and argue. I don't like to argue, but if you want to email and argue with me, that's fine. I will, I'll calmly discuss and say that, I'll deter to you if I say something wrong. What I will say is that, the book may be magical realism. The show may be considered that too. The show is adult themed. It has adult language and lots of nudity and sex. It's got the 3 S's. It's got smoking, suicide, and self-harm. So watch out if you're sensitive to these type of things. It's got things like cockfighting and inappropriate age gap relations, sometimes between family members. So, it's edgy. This is an edgy show. So It doesn't come across as such. I was telling you that this show could easily have been like a children's show if they didn't include all the sex. I think it could have been redone in like a PG-13 type of way. But they went for it. They wanted to, get as many eyeballs on it as possible. And kids grow up so fast these days, Lindsey, they can handle it.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure I agree with that, but I thought it was an interesting reflection you had that it could have been a kid's show. I think it just feels like a kid's show because it has that magic in it.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to associate magic with kids or teens, and I guess we don't always see our world as magical as adults.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I kind of like to. But I think the themes are quite, besides just the content, the themes themselves are adult about, we'll kind of get at that later, but it's like, what are the themes of this show and what is it trying to say? What are the lessons that can be learned?
Mm-hmm.
And fairy tales aren't always just for kids. I mean, the original fairy tales were quite dark and quite grim. But I
Of
think there is
course.
that mentality sometimes, which is why people were so upset about, Game of Thrones. They're throwing it in there for Freddie, that it's like, oh, this show, I could have watched this with my teen, but now I'm like uncomfortable because it has this sex in it. So that it
Right,
can be
right.
awkward. But yeah.
And something else I wanted to say too, because you were talking about the politics of the time and of certain genres and of course of like, South American heritage. The reason I bring that up is because they say like that's one of the first things that they say in this show is that they want to go to a place where everybody is free to do as they want. So, it's almost like politically charged, like right from the get-go, like the impetus of this whole series.
Oh, huh. I don't know. I was like, that's kind of like their version of the American dream almost. Like,
Yeah,
that's
sure.
what you want, is like everybody can do what they want and be happy. And it can be sort of a false narrative, but that's how you become a good politician. You have to sell your idea of like your version of utopia. And there are characters that try to do that in this show.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't think I have much else to say about this book. I did, I usually don't like to binge shows, but I have been. That's been what me and my wife have been doing. That's what we do like every night now as we've been watching, shows in quick succession, series of shows. And so when I watched the first episode of this to see how it was, Heather was watching it with me and she immediately wanted to go to episode 2. And then she was on board and she, jotted down like a family tree. Like she was trying to figure out who the characters were. She was very into it. So she didn't read the book. She just came into this because she knew it was a book that Charlotte read and a show that me and you were doing. And she inadvertently fell in love with it, and that she didn't have to because, she was right there when we were watching Dark and she noped out sometime during season 2.
Mm-hmm.
She had no interest in Wheel of Time whatsoever. Time Bandits, nope. But this show, she was all in and she was taking notes.
Yeah, I mean, Heather's the type that if she's like not interested, she'll check out. So
Exactly.
that's,
Yeah.
She's not watching anything out of obligation.
Right. Yeah. So that's my selling point of the show. Like you and I are obligated. We decided to do this and like, we're putting time and effort into it. She didn't have to, and she did.
Yeah. Well, I was going to reserve our right. Like we could have, as far as I was concerned, if after episode 1, we were like, this show is boring as all get out. We always have the right to check out and say, we tried it and it failed to impress us. So, but based on the fact that you already finished all the episodes, then I guess you're interested, it was enough to at least keep your interest.
Before we get into the recap, please, I mean, the listeners are dying to know. I mean, just before we get into it, what's your opinion after seeing this first episode? What's your broad overview opinion?
I think the ideas that it's getting at are fun and things I like to think about. It's not as deep as some shows, although, I can really milk an idea. But I think it's a beautifully shot show. I like the way that it's shot and the direction. There's a lot of long takes where they're walking from one place to another.
I'm a sucker for that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating stuff. This show did just in the first episode, and it'll be brought in through the recap, but it's like there were many times when I was like, oh, this reminds me of this show. And this, a lot of them were fantasies. And I was like, watching it. So it's using a lot of now you could say, oh, it's using a lot of the tropes that are out there. But based on the fact that this is such a seminal piece of literature, it could be that some groups are getting it from this book, that we think are original.
Yeah, this was written in, you said 1970, but it was written in 1967. So, it predates, anything you might have seen on TV from the 80s on.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're going to do our recap for us, aren't you? You're going to be the one who leads us from scene to scene. Is that correct, Lindsey?
Yeah. I'm going to try. I'm going to try to do it, make you proud.
Yeah, okay.
With Dark, we had the written recaps that described every moment, but we're going to do more of an outline. So
yeah, outlines.
All right, so we're starting with this kind of a tour through the space of the Jose Arcadio lifestyle here. We got a house, we've got bloody sheets, we have a baby crib, we have photos, we have an old workshop. Tannhouse's workshop. Tannhouse himself is standing in front of the bench.
Astrolabe over there, yeah.
Yeah. There's a family tree and Ouroboros, and he seems to be contemplating the world. So what did you think about the fact that they just opened on this? It was just sort of a tour through a physical space.
It's the kind of thing that you really... It's great on the rewatch more so than the first watch. It sets the tone when you're first watching it, but then when you watch the rewatch or after you've already read it, you realize that, you're seeing this through the eyes of presumably a future Buendia. And he's going through the ruins of the house. And, these things that they're showing us, we're going to revisit them. And if you've read the book, these things are very important that make appearances. The photograph of the family, that imagery of the miscarriage, those are things that we're going to come back and see in future times. So first watch, it's fun. You're just kind of getting into it, and the music is cool and the setting is cool. But when you do the rewatch, you're really putting things together, and it's rewarding.
Yeah, it's just kind of a tour through a space. You don't know what's happening in the space, but they're kind of showing you before anything's happened some of these places and objects that will be important to the story.
Yeah.
We then cut to this man in a very dashing mustache and find out his name is Colonel Aureliano Buendia. And he is at a firing squad thinking about when his dad helped him see ice for the first time.
Yes.
And as soon as I saw this, I thought, I've heard about this before, but I don't remember where I've heard about it before. But it might just be a glitch in the Matrix, Steve. It's
might be.
Here, I remember hearing this kind of a cold open. It's a great storytelling device, right? They just kind of show you this man, and he's at a firing squad, and of course you're wondering, why is he there? How did he get here? Who are these men aiming weapons at him? But his mind is on the past. His mind is thinking about the day he learned what ice was. It's like you think about a creative writing class, and this would be a sentence they'd give you maybe as a prompt and say, hey, you write the rest of the story now. What happens next? Or tell us about the day he heard about ice, and you'd have to do that for a creative writing exercise. What did you think about it, Steve?
I think we just have to remember that this was written in 1967. It covers a 100-year period. So the 100-year period is from 1867 to 1967. So this guy is seeing the dawning of a lot of interesting things that his family and his culture has never seen before, such as ice. So I think might have been one of the reasons that they chose this type of time period and this culture. Well, the person who wrote this was part of this culture. It was a Colombian. But I guess what I have to say is I loved it, and and it's we're probably going to see a lot more neat things like that, like the appearance of things as they're invented.
Yeah, there's the story about, we're kind of wondering about this story about the ice, but at the same time, when you first meet a character, you're like, oh, this is who I'm going to learn about. This is who I was perspective. And then it jumps back in the past to these kissing cousins.
Right.
And it opens it switches from this, story about ice. This guy's in the present having weapons aimed at him. He's thinking about the past. And then it jumps back to what I call the Hobbit party scene. The Hobbits are having a birthday party. It's the 111st birthday party, but it's actually like a party to celebrate that these kissing cousins, Jose Arcadio Buendia and Ursula, they're having a party for their nuptials. And we find out that they're expected to wed, but Mama Petronella has warned Ursula that her choice to marry her cousin will result in the birth of an iguana or a pig.
Right. So like in the book, like somebody actually did give birth to like a pig or something. And like that's what spurred this whole thing, this whole fear. But I wanted just to back up real briefly because the guy with the mustache on the fire and Scrog with the ice, this whole season is an exploration of that character. We don't see him a whole lot in this episode because this episode is like the birth of this character, basically. But he's going to be the main focus of our story going forward. But first, we have to see where he came from. So, yeah, this is mom and pop. They're cousins and they're married and they're afraid that their offspring are going to be. Yeah, that's a valid fear that, you know, because you're related, your offspring is going to be affected by that. Completely valid, you know.
Mm-hmm. So would you rather raise a pig or an iguana, Steve?
Oh, a pig for sure. Like, like iguanas don't really seem like they really care that you're around. They just kind of exist with you, whereas a pig will kind of form a bond with you. So I'd rather have a pig. How about you?
Well, I mean, I think a pig is cuter. However, iguana is smaller, so that might be easier to give birth to an iguana. But I but I also thought it was interesting that Ursula tells Jose Arcadio that it's not that a pig came out, it was a child with a pig's tail.
Sure, yes.
And that is a real genetic condition that can happen. Is that, you know, we saw that in Shallow Hal, the movie Shallow Hal, if you remember.
Of course.
Where George, as you discover, you know, you find out he has a little
Jason
tail.
Alexander, yeah.
So you wonder, though, I mean, the valid fear is, when you say a valid fear, I'm kind of like, is it a valid fear, or is it, you know, there's a mental thing that, you know, we know now that genetically, if you marry a relative, there's a chance they could have a birth defect. That's the reality.
Yes.
But it wasn't that she was actually going to give birth to a pig. It's that a child had a pig's tail, or has a tuft of hair around the tail.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I was like, there's a lot of stuff to do with animals here. There's pigs, there's iguanas, there's roosters that factor into the show.
Birds later, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess the whole thing there is because of that fear that her mother has put in her, she wears this chastity belt at all times. Is it okay if I go ahead and move us a little forward a little bit, or do you want to do that?
Oh, well, I was going to say she just gets a special form of birth control from her mother.
Yeah.
And we find out what that is just a little later. But yes, it's these belts. So she gives her a gift of these belts, and Jose discovers that she's wearing them on the wedding night. So
yeah, he's not worried about it. He's like, yeah, I don't care if our kid has a tail. No big deal to me. But that fear is more instilled in Ursula than Jose. But Jose is like, I don't care. That's what he says anyway. You don't know if it's actually true or not. That's what he says.
I mean, is it? I was like, is it that he doesn't care, or is that he wants to have sex with his wife? You know, I mean,
right. Well, I mean, she pleases him in other ways. It's pretty clear. They show that happening here. So like they have these nightly wrestling matches, and they get out their sexual energy, but they're not actually having intercourse at this point because of Ursula's fear. That's right.
Now we see a little bit of what their married life is like. They're at their home village, and basically Ursula embroiders, and Jose goes out and raises roosters for rooster fighting that he gambles with. So it's a tough life. It's a very tough life. And in the evenings they make out. So, I mean, these guys they're having a hard knock life at their home village.
But I mean, they have fun while they're having their wrestling matches for sure. And these, I gotta say, like it's really problematic the way they're showing like this rooster fighting, cockfighting as it's known. I was kind of like upset by how normalized it was, like just how it just seems so normal. Then I realized that this is being filmed in Colombia, and this is like a cultural thing. And I'm like, okay, well, they're supposed to be back in the 1800s, culturally it's fine. No, Lindsey. No. They're still cockfighting in Colombia in 2024. It's not illegal. It's broadly legal. It's broadly recognized as a cultural accepted thing. PETA doesn't like it, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of, protesting around it, but it's a completely normal thing. Our American eyes don't like seeing this, but I think maybe our South American listeners might not think it's a big deal to see this. But I didn't like it. I'm an animal lover myself, and I don't like any situation where an animal can be hurt. But yeah, I just had to bring that up. That's what they're doing here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. And it's pretty terrible to kind of, I mean, okay, I'm not trying to insult anybody, but yeah, what they're basically doing is they take two roosters that have no issue with each other. The roosters are happy as can be to share space, and then they basically like shove them in each other's face. And, if that happens enough, then the rooster's going to get aggressive. And it's like whoever pecks the hardest, and they're just sitting there going, the men are just going peck, 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 peck. And, whichever, eventually one of those roosters is going to get aggressive because of the treatment it's receiving, and one of them kills the other. And then whoever dies gets made into soup that they all enjoy. And this is all for the pleasure of the men that, so they can gamble. And, I guess this is how Jose makes his living, earns enough money to feed himself and his wife. So yeah, it's pretty ugly.
Yeah. And they have they have an inciting incident one night for this. This whole cockfighting thing is like integral to our story because it's like the impetus of everything. Sweet Shot of Time is brought to you by Zencastr. Zencastr is the way we record Sweet Shot of Time. We hook up with our guests via video and we record it on audio. Recently, we've been doing video podcasts with the cast of Time Bandits. It's easy using Zencastr. You can record video or audio. You can also edit your podcast or your video via Zencastr. Join Zencastr using my promo code Sweet Child of Time, and you can get 30% off Zencastr. If you're ready to start your podcast, it's time to share your story. Share it with Zencastr. That promo code once again, Sweet Child of Time at Zencastr.com. Did you want to go on to like our next beat here?
Yeah, so we have Prudencio is the very first person that we see him, having a rooster fight with, and he decides to insult Jose by bringing up the fact that he and his wife hasn't consummated the marriage. I guess somehow everybody knows this because their windows are open and they can people over here. I don't know
how much
privacy
that's why
they get. But he brings up the fact that maybe this rooster can do your wife a favor, or this cock, he says, can do your wife a favor. And Jose says, go get a weapon. I'm challenging you to a duel. And it's like Hamilton in here. He's going to challenge him to a duel. And the dialogue, I do wonder if people would think the translators are doing a good job, because the responses you get is, this is like the crowd that's talking. They say, this is bad. Seriously, this is not good.
Wait, did you watch it in English or did you watch it in Spanish?
In
okay,
Spanish.
yeah. Okay,
but
yeah.
I mean, the words that you see translated.
Okay, yeah.
So Jose says, choose your weapon, but I guess Prudencio didn't need to really bother with that.
No, that's in my notes too. Like, he didn't even give him a chance. Comes in town like a wrecking ball.
And how does Jose tell us how Jose dispenses with him?
Oh yeah, he chooses a spear as his weapon, so it doesn't even matter what Prudencio could have possibly, even a gun, I think, wouldn't have worked, because everybody's lined up waiting for the big fight to happen because they know it's about to happen. This is like a public thing. And I guess this is another common thing as well, these type of duels. But yeah, Jose comes in with that spear, and before he even gets in touching distance of the guy, he hurls the spear at his neck and kills him instantly. The crowd is kind of horrified. I think they were expecting more of a fight, or maybe they were just expecting them to yell at each other a lot or something. But Jose went over the top. And
maybe they wanted something more like the Roosters, where there would be some pecking first.
Some taunting, yeah. And no, he just goes right for the kill. And then, in pure, macho fantasy, apparently this is a fair duel. He goes home, chooses that night to consummate his marriage with his wife, and then decides to leave town, like all in one fell swoop. Like all this stuff happens immediately.
He says, the line he says is, "There will be no more death because of us." And and this is how he convinces
Ursula.
Yeah, he convinces Ursula to take off her belts. Now, I wondered if she was like, "Oh gosh, he's gone out and murdered somebody. I better give him what he wants." I don't know, but I don't know. My question was, is this romantic or not, Steve? That that he says there'll be no more death because of us.
I read fantasy books, and I'm thinking about books such as Wheel of Time, Game of Thrones, The First Law. Not so much Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings was way more PG than the rest of these. But it was well known that, like, after a bloody battle, that's exactly what the men wanted to do. They got their spirits up, and they wanted to, go and consummate and, be manly and have sex after their big battle. And I think that this is just a generalization of that exact same thing. Like, the man insulted his manhood. He killed that man, and then he went home and proved to everyone that he could consummate his marriage with his wife by having sex with her. Mm-hmm. So it's like that's why I call it a lot of like bravado, macho bravado, basically.
In a sense, it's kind of like, well, was he trying, what's his motive here? Is it he wants to prove himself to the town? There's a level of pride in,
yes.
at what he's doing.
Yes.
So he is then found not guilty by the town. They decide that this was a fair duel. This was a fair fight. Everybody understood, or it was a fight with honor, I guess. Everybody understood what was happening. So based on that, you're off the hook, Jose. Kind of. But then we discover that they have a new house guest.
Yeah.
And Prudencio is now haunting their home, and it shows up. He's just hanging out there looking for a drink of water, and he'll show up anywhere. He shows up at their bed. He shows up at mealtime. He's just kind of hanging out at the house.
He shows up at town too. Like they go into town to like do some shopping, and he's following them both into town too. Everywhere they go into the town, Prudencio follows. I think it's a very clear, obvious metaphor for like the guilt and like the some shame involved in that whole outburst and the way that Jose overreacted to it. I think it's like his guilt manifested and won't leave him alone.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you ever killed anyone, Steve?
Negative. I have not.
I haven't either.
You?
Good.
How about you?
But I was kind of thinking about if somebody haunted my house, who would it be?
Okay.
And, I was thinking, what are some things that I've done before that I have guilt over?
Okay.
But we don't necessarily have to announce them on TV. But I was like, I don't even really... the one I have a mistake. I feel like that something I'm embarrassed about that I did when I was a kid is that, I was a nerd and got, picked on a lot as a kid. And at one point though, there was a girl I had made friends with. There was somebody that I was excited that decided to give me the time of day. Mm-hmm. And she sort of made fun of another one of my friends. And then she would make fun of her. And I, at one point, joined her in that, so this is in middle school.
Sure.
And, there's been times in my life that I have thought about that girl. So it's like, that girl's probably, I don't know, moved off into the sunset. She's fine with it. But my guilt, remains about that. So I was trying to imagine what it would be like to be Jose Arcadio here.
Sure.
Saying, he was pronounced not guilty by the town. There's no punishment. And yet this guy remains. So I don't know.
I think for me, a more realistic way to like put myself in his shoes is not so much to think about like an actual manifestation of that, but, just the fact that if your mind just keeps returning to something, like, you say you keep returning to that moment. And yeah, I've got more than enough of those type of moments that I keep replaying in my mind over and over and over again. And I believe that's what's happening here is that he just can't get that whole image out of his mind can't get that whole scenario out of his mind, and it's just manifesting itself that way. So I don't think that like there would ever be a person that would come around and haunt me, but like I
Mhm.
just kind of haunt myself in my own brain.
But it's interesting because you don't really get the feeling that he's necessarily feeling that guilty about it, you know?
That's why we
So,
need the manifestation. Without
yeah.
that, we wouldn't even know.
So then Jose decides we're moving.
Yeah.
We're moving because this is no longer tolerable to have Prudencio show up in our bed.
Yeah, and here's where it really gets logistically crazy because they decide to leave town, but then the town decides to leave with them.
Mhm. Yeah, so before we go on to the move, I wanted to stop just for a moment and on the character of Jose Arcadio, the dad, our main
Yeah,
character for this episode.
sure.
What do you think about him? Like, what do you think about his personality? What kind of person do you think he is? Does he have any major flaws that are jumping out at you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't I didn't really delve that much into that thought process. He's likable in such a way that he's affable, pleasing to the eye. He's like a charismatic person. However, I think he's a little over the top. I think like he's rash and maybe not really thinking about the consequences and not really thinking through his actions. He's really quick to act
Hmm.
to a detriment.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. He seems like they let us know he's a little bit of a dreamer.
Yeah.
Later, he's in his head a lot. He imagines maybe a different life. He might be the kind of person that's never satisfied with the life he has. He's always thinking about how could it be better. He sort of jumps and kind of expects the people to jump along with him, which is part of his charisma, and people do jump with him. He
Yeah.
talks them. Even though he's not necessarily, you never see him try to talk people into going, but they're like, "Hey, you're going to go somewhere," and then he's like, he's probably like, "Yeah, we're going to go. We're going to cross to the mountains." Where the ocean is. It's never been done before, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the one.
Yeah, and they want to join him because he's charismatic and it seems like he's fun to be around, especially when he's in a good mood.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that leads his character.
Right. So they leave with sort of an entourage, and it reminded me of a little bit of a Moses situation where
Sure.
Moses leading the Israelites through the desert to the promise of a new land.
Yeah, that's the exact metaphor that we're looking at here. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But before they leave, Mama Petronilla tells Ursula, no matter where you go, you can't escape your true destiny. And she puts her hand on her belly again. And I wasn't clear when Mama says the true destiny, does she mean your destiny is to give birth to a pig? I mean, because I was like, what? That was the fear she instilled in her. So that was the only thing I could think of, that Mama was referring to there.
No, I didn't even think that. I thought my mind immediately went to anytime somebody like in a movie or a TV show or even in real life is like, I'm going to leave, I'm going to get out of here, things suck, I'm going to go here where it's better. It's like, well, when you go there, you're going to be there too. And so will all your anxieties. And so you're going to bring yourself with you. So don't forget, you can't escape yourself. So I think that was what she was saying. Like, even though you guys are leaving town, you think everything's going to be good, but still watch out for that offspring.
Yeah.
Take a little bit of worry with you, Ursula. Here's some worry.
Yeah. I mean, she does put her hand on her belly. So I was like, I thought it referred to the baby when she does that. But it was
absolutely.
But yeah, it was but it was an interesting thing because she says, you'll no matter how far you go, you'll never escape your true destiny. It's like, well, it wasn't Ursula's idea. It was Jose Arcadio's idea to go. So it's not like Ursula's the one running away. She's just, that's where my husband's going, so I'm going to go to support him. So they set up this, they're in this now modern caravan, or I don't know why I said modern caravan, but it's a tent city. They're traveling from place to place, and they set up these temporary camps on the way. And it's another long take scene here where they sort of show you what everybody's doing. And Ursula has morning sickness, so we discover she's pregnant. and she sees this omen of an adorable pig, which
Mm-hmm.
why wouldn't you want to raise that pig? I mean, he's pretty cute.
It's cute.
Sees this omen of a pig, and then it turns into a baby. It's a dream, and then it's sort of like she's having this nightmare, and then you get a jump through time where now when she wakes up, she's, on the verge of giving birth to this baby / possible pig.
But no, we see its shiny butt. There's no
Yes.
tail back there. It's a completely human baby, fear unfounded. Yeah, so she gives birth in a really interesting way, this more primitive way of getting birth with a vertical birthing stick. So she's like standing up to give birth, which I mean makes total sense. But, to my American eyes and being around when two babies were born, it seemed odd to me that she would be tied to a stick and then standing up. But, they do it that way. Jose Arcadio is what is what they named the baby, which that's the same name as the dad, right? Jose Arcadio.
Yeah,
Check.
he's our Jose Arcadio Buendia.
Mm-hmm.
And then the little boy they call Jose Arcadio, but probably I'm assuming he's also a Buendia.
Absolutely.
But the birthing thing is interesting because I saw that the first time I've seen a birth this way portrayed is in the Nativity Story, the movie where, Mary gives birth to Jesus, and they hold these ropes and they kind of squat, and, they can. So it's actually the way that makes sense to have a baby because gravity will help the baby to drop, which makes me then horrified, honestly, the fact that I've never given birth, but, we make us Americans, the moms lay on their back and have to push up.
Yeah.
That's like against gravity. But it's for the convenience of the doctor.
Yes.
That they're lying on this bed. So that kind of horrifies me when I think about that. So
I think like our modern science should like look at these episodes and be like, when we go to change our cars, we have these pits we get underneath of the car so we can do our job. Maybe we can get underneath of the women in the same way and they can let gravity do its job. That's the way that the Barnes hospital is going to be run.
Is it like today I told you I took my parents to visit a facility that, it's an assisted living facility. And I thought their laundry room was really interesting because the washers and dryers are elevated off of the ground, so you don't have to lean over to get your laundry. So they've built them to be ergonomically safe. So ergonomically safe pregnancies seem much more important.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it seemed odd, but it makes logistical sense to me completely. Yeah, this whole like entourage of these people that are following him through. I'm going to go back to stress on that. We see like a vertical shot of them when they're like on a mountainside and they're like walking all along a mountain. And I counted like at least like 60 or 70 people like in his entourage because sometimes it looks like there's about 20 of them. But when you get other shots, I mean, it's clear there's more than 50 people that are part of this group. Mm-hmm. At one point, they have on these like they look like little huts themselves because they have on these straw rain suits. And those are actually like climately specific. That's what people in those climates would do for the rain is, dried husks of like large grass, and that repels the rain from your body. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they're all wearing that and looking all cool, looking like they're part of the scenery themselves.
Maybe you should wear one of those next time you have a rainy job, Steve. Instead of a yellow raincoat, just get your little straw coat.
I work for an American corporation that spends hundreds of dollars on my safety equipment, so I'm going to take advantage of it. They travel for 2 years, these people. There's 2 years of travel is what they said.
Yes. And along the way, before we find out it's been 2 years, we have a scene called The Donkey Did It. And
yes, okay.
The donkey, they're like all traveling with their straw hats. It's cold. It's windy. This reminded me of the Pass of Caradhras scene in the Fellowship of the Ring, where the hobbits and the dwarves and the elves are going to the mountains. It's very cold.
Yeah.
It's very treacherous. And this donkey just freaks out. This scene made me, I was like, I was terrified by the scene because this donkey just freaks out and goes over the mountain, taking at least one person with him. Another person
Hmm.
almost falls, and they have to rescue that person.
Yeah.
That scene kind of freaked me out. But then after that, everybody's safe. Everybody's safe who made it. And you
They
see
hug.
them hanging in their tent, and it's cold and rainy. And Jose says, "Hang in there." And I'm completely serious. That's what the translation says. And I'm like, did he really say hang in there? Is that? But he says, hang in there. We'll be there in no time. And then you find out it's been 2 years. So.
Right. And then you find out from the time that he says this, hang in there, guys. We're almost there. It's like 5 more months after this until they finally break ground somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, his crew is pretty hardy crew that
Mhm.
sticks in there. And we only know of one that they lost, the one that fell over the cliff.
Mhm. Mhm.
I like when they arrive at this swamp because they come upon like this swamp at one point. Am I getting too ahead of you, or can I talk about the swamp?
Well, they crossed the mountains, so they made it to their goal. But when they got to the other side of the mountain, they discovered there's no ocean, but we've made it to a swamp. So yeah, go ahead.
Right. Yeah, they're right on the out. They're basically on the outskirts of the ocean, but they don't realize this. They're in the swampy area. And so it shows them like trudging through this swamp, and it seems pretty aimless. But something I wanted to point out to anybody that might be rewatching this is those yellow flowers that are all over the swamp. We're going to revisit those yellow flowers a few times later. That becomes like a theme for us. It's like the entrance of the swamp. But yeah, it looks nasty. I would not like being part of his crew at this time. They says they wandered through the swamp for months, and then I didn't quite get this right, but they were tromping through, they're miserable. And then they come upon like their own group, I think.
Mhm.
So they like
Mhm.
walked into like a circle. So they walked into the tail end of their own group. And that's when they kind of got frustrated. Does that
Yeah,
sound
they
right?
yeah, they were he sees some people and he's like, "Hey, wait up. Hey." And it's like the rest of his group. So then he's like, "Oh, we are going in a circle because he's found the back of it, the tail of his group is who he's seeing."
Ouroboros. That's right.
Um
Yep.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's interesting cuz you said it didn't look pretty, but I thought it was pretty nice to look at. I mean, maybe I wouldn't like to walk through it. I mean, a
Right.
swamp. But with
Right.
the yellow flowers,
Mm-hmm.
it was very dreamy. But I did put down the swamps of sadness because it reminded me of Never Ending Story. because Not because it's a swamp and they're there for a long time, but the people get really discontented at this point. Now they're getting mad because, and
Yeah.
that's what happens when you get frustrated, is you blame the person that drug you out there, and you say, this is all your fault that we're here.
True, but they didn't really harp on that as much as they could have. There's no like really big scene where everybody's like yelling at him and like angry at him or anything like that. It's just kind of like everybody's really dispirited and he
Yeah.
recognizes that. So it's not like, the mob came up against him and forced him to do this thing. He kind of looked around and thought the same thing that I think sometimes, Lindsay. I'm on the road a lot. I drive a
Hmm.
lot. And especially when me and Charlotte would do our cross country drives, I would just be driving so much. And I'm like, I'd see a house and I'd like, let's just live there. I'm so tired of driving. Let's just live there. And then like maybe next week we'll have our stuff like shipped here. Because I'm so tired of driving. I just want to stay here and just forget about everything. And that's basically what they decide to do. They're dispirited and they decide, well, here we are. We've came here. I'm gonna stay here. He throws a little caveat. He's like, you guys can do whatever you want, by the way. Let me remind y'all, after 2.5 years, you don't have to do this with me, but I'm staying. Y'all are welcome to stay here too. I think this comes to him in a dream. And in the dream, he's like leaning up against this tree and he wakes up and he's at the base of this tree. Again, this is some imagery we want to remember is like him at the base of this tree, this particular tree where he decides to stay.
Hmm. Before he has the dream, he does have this come to Jesus moment from Ursula. She's the one that says, it's time to open your eyes.
Okay, right.
and I don't know how she meant it. She might have meant it like it's time for you to realize that everybody's unhappy and maybe we should go back. But instead, he says, I had this dream and this is actually where I meant to go all along. So it's almost,
Right.
he almost has this is what makes him a good politician and a good leader is he's like,
Sure.
you guys thought I was lost. Because it's funny because he wakes up and he has like the smuggest look on his face. Like he
Right.
just looks so happy. And he says, this is where I meant to go along. Everybody can choose your own path. We're staying here. And it's going to be a place where we can raise our kids and everybody's going to be happy. And it's going to be called Macondo, a name that means nothing, according to him. Like it has no meaning at this time. But why were we calling it that? I don't know. I guess it was part of the dream that he had, that it was going to be called Macondo.
The writer of the story wanted to make this a fictional town. So that's why he made up a town name. He didn't want to have it like a place in actual, reality. So in order to keep it a fantasy, he made up a town name. And he used a name that, like he said, doesn't really exist. It might have come to mean something now in slang term. But in the book, of course, books do this type of thing. They describe Macondo in a much more fantastic, more vivid way. Like he says in the dialogue that he has a dream of like all the houses like have mirrors on them and there's all this color everywhere. And so there's a real vivid picture painted in the book of the town and, what the town will be. And yeah, it talks a lot about mirrors and polished stones and shiny objects where everybody can live the way they want. All the houses are arranged perfectly so they get the right amount of sunlight, and everybody's gardens are arranged perfectly so the soil temperatures are perfect. I mean, this place is the bomb.
Yeah. And then he decides to fill each house with the sound of birds.
Right.
And I guess he did not consult with his wife because she is wearing earplugs because it takes you, the way that it says it is it takes you out of reality, makes you forget where you are. And I thought that was an interesting way to phrase that the sound of the birds is so loud that you don't know where you are. So it kind of reminded me of that Otaconia from Dark, where the birds, crash down because of the way that it's a little, it's different, obviously, but the hairs in their ears they don't know, they couldn't find their grounding and the birds just crash to the ground. There's a little bit of an ominous tone to it, I feel like. But yet you think of the sound of birds, it should be a very happy, cheerful thing.
Yeah, I guess that was a pretty good one-to-one there. For me, though, I thought a little differently because I'm really into the music of this show. Like the composer and this soundtrack is wonderful. I want to take a second just to shout that out because I love all the music. Like anytime the episode is over, I would just let the credits play for like the credits go for like 8 or 9 minutes because they do all like the foreign language credits too. And they play music the whole time and it's great. So when I think about the birds and that they make you forget where they are, it makes me think about like when I put background music on when I read, it kind of helps me, elevate and be able to focus on the book more and be in a more, I guess, maybe creative or more a sponge of creativity with some music going in the background. And birds are musical. So that's what it made me think of is like, having some background music always going on to kind of calm your mind. Ursula's not the type that background noise calms her mind. It gets on her nerves. So she's got to stuff that beeswax in there.
So before we move on, I just want to highlight something you said, but it was really quick. But I want to make sure that, because I think it's an important part of this episode and kind of going forward, is that it talks about that they've set up this place with equity. They do not use that word, but everyone is equidistant from the water so that everybody has to work the same amount to get what they need. There are these large white stones that are a part of the place where they live, and no house gets more or less shade or sun than the other. And somehow Jose Arcadio has set this up. He, in his wisdom and guidance, he has set up this place where it's equal for all. Like everybody has equal share in the wealth of the resources that are there in
Yeah.
the town. Into this kind of utopia, then we have the change. It's inevitable that a change has to happen, and that change arrives in the form of these gypsies.
Oh, right. Sure. Great.
They interject some different things into the town and sort of disrupt what has been formed.
Okay, yeah, I was like, did I skip that in my notes? There's no way I could have skipped that in my notes. But then, like, my bird note goes right into Miracules and his crew. Before that happens, though, we always like to do this. Well, before we move forward, we got to go backwards. These great single shots that they do at least one every episode of the show. And in this episode, they do it with little young Jose Ocadio. He's like a toddler of maybe 2 or 3, and he's naked and he's running through the village. And the camera faithfully follows him from house to house, from person to person, from, room to room. It's all timed great. We get one of these every episode, and I really love these types of shots.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be remiss if I did not point out the fact that in his travels, Jose Arcadio goes and gets something from a local woman who we're going to know as Pilar. That's Pilar that gives Jose Arcadio the item that he then takes over to like his mom or his dad. So keep that in the back of your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the take shot of Jose Arcadio was interesting because he's naked as a jaybird. I don't know if you said that fact, but it kind of reminded me of the pig. The fact that she's worried about this pig, it reminded me of a little pig, running through the town with butt naked.
Yeah, sure.
But what's interesting is you see the village, layout of the village, but you also cut through time because they talk about, he set up the birds, and as Jose, goes through the door, they jump through time, and now there's all these bird cages. So it's interesting how they do that. So they're showing you the place. They're also showing you the passage of time, and they did it once before already in this episode with Ursula, how she discovers she's pregnant, and then she has the dream, and when she wakes up, she's like almost ready to give birth. So
sure.
Yeah.
It's going to keep doing it that way, and this show will do that, where like time will pass very fast, but as a scene is happening, a couple years may slip by. In this episode alone, I believe we cover at least, 5 years, at least, if not more, because we see little Jose Arcadio grow up and become a little naked toddler. So it has to be at least a 5-year gap, or a 4-year gap, I should say.
So the gypsies arrive, led by Melquiades. And at first, Jose is like, "How did you find us?" And he says, "We found you because of the birds. The noises of the birds attracted us."
That's pretty important, yeah.
They demonstrate the craft of alchemy. All they really do is open some magnets, and all of the dishware comes to those magnets. But to these people, it seems like magic or witchcraft. Yeah.
Like, right. Yeah.
Yes.
And he doesn't claim that it's witchcraft. Somebody throws the name witchcraft in his face, but he doesn't claim to be a magic man or anything. He's like, they're magnets. I got them from Macedonia. He seems kind of shady in some respects. And I know Ursula doesn't trust him, but he doesn't show any sign of really being shady other than his vibe. But yeah, these magnets are really cool, and they've never seen anything like this before. I think this is before the ice situation, obviously. So I think this might be the first thing they see, the first invention that they encounter that really blows their minds.
Mm-hmm. Again, I think I'm calling it disruption because they had this utopia set up, but in a way, the entrance of the gypsies reopens Jose Arcadio's dissatisfaction with what he has. And what I thought was interesting, and why I wanted to make sure we brought up how equal everybody was, is that he gets completely dazzled when he goes into Melquiades' tent.
Oh, yeah.
These are gypsies, but yet they don't necessarily, it doesn't seem to me that they follow the same, perhaps, equity lines, because Melquiades has this grand tent that's sort of set apart from the rest of the people. Like, he's the king of the gypsies. And I think when Jose Arcadio sees that, he gets temporarily dazzled by, oh, I want to use these magnets to find gold.
Right. His brain is always clicking.
Yeah.
Like when you were talking about how the houses are arranged so they all get shade and they're all the even spaces away from the water, you were a little snarky there saying that Jose like took all the credit for it. But I really think he should deserve credit for that because he's a very observant person. He takes in his surroundings very well. And I think those kind of things would be to his peripheral. He would notice these things and would, be a good engineer / architect / town designer and be able to like help his friends because these are his friends, help his friends have as much as he does and be able to benefit the same way he does, as opposed to trying to one up them or be their king or something.
I did not mean it as snarky, but I thought it was kind of unrealistic in a way that I mean it's back to the magical realism. It's like somehow he's set up this perfect town so that everybody has an equal share. In my experience, that's not realistic. That's not usually whoever the guy is in charge, he's going to make sure his family is taken care of. That's just human nature. So the fact that this is Macondo is set up to be this utopia, some might say, oh, that's a communist, it's a communist ideal.
Yeah.
So that's where the politics come in. That's not like, nowhere is this overt. We're not having a debate about communism on the show, but it's inside of the text, that they're doing this. Whereas these gypsies come in, and you're right, like in a way, this guy is like, by all accounts, Melquiades is up front. He tells them right away, this is not going to attract gold. He's not, these magnets won't get gold. He's honest with him. He doesn't tell him any lies, and he appears to even give him some stuff for free, no charge. He gives him his goats back.
Oh my God, yeah. What a godsend. Yeah, I wanted to go into that. Ursula is all like, you can't trust this man. You can't give this man our goats. We don't trust this guy. And miraculously, instead of just saying like, yeah, you can have your goats back, no big deal about the magnets. In fact, how about here's an astrolabe, here is a compass, here's some maps, here's some charts. He just gives them this armload of all this scientific stuff. I think because he recognizes that Jose is a curious person. So he wants to give him these things so he can do something with them.
So I haven't watched, these AW. You have, and so don't tell me. But yeah, it almost seemed like he was too good to be true to me. That plus the fact that, and this is the one deception I find in what he did, is first he tells him, we found you with the birds. And then the second time, now Jose asks a different question. He says, how did you make it through the swamps? And he says, it was a difficult journey, and we used this astrolabe. So he never mentioned the astrolabe the first time. He mentions the birds. But you're right. Maybe he thought, this guy is different, or he's not going to be satisfied with me just saying birds. But it could look like he changed his story. Like first he left out part of the information.
It absolutely could look like that. Yeah, to my perspective, it was like we were traveling through the swamp. I was using my astrolabe and my compass. And then as we were traveling, we were sidetracked by the sound of your birds. And that's how we found you. So to me, that made perfect sense, and I didn't question it. But yeah, like the way he seems like a shady character. And usually when one character, Ursula, is like, I don't trust him, usually that means something. So sure, yeah, tuck that in your hat for later if you want to if you want to see if that comes up to rear its head. In this episode, this guy seems, way too good to be true. And Jose's idea to like use the magnets to get gold, and the first thing Miraculous does is like, no, that's not going to work. But he goes and tries it anyway. And I'm like, why? That made me think, you have this utopia now. You have this perfect society. Why do you want to introduce gold to it? What does gold mean to you? Why do you even want this? And I think that's just, I thought about that a bunch. And as I was reading the book too, I thought about that. And what I chalk that up to is the author just didn't think that through at the time, 1967. It seemed like a logical goal that men could latch on to. Like, I want gold, I'm going to get it and use a tool to find it. That seems like a universal thing that men in that time would, identify with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's why it was included in there, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Why does he want gold? Where are you going to take it? What are you going to do with it besides make a cool bracelet?
I mean, it doesn't make sense, Steve, but I mean, if you think that the vision of utopia, but I guess that's the question, like, politically, does it work? Does it work to have a village where everybody has equal access to all the resources? Can that last? Or is somebody going to get dissatisfied and think, I could have a little more? I mean, isn't that what that story of the fisherman and his wife is all about? The
Sure.
fisherman has a nice life, but the wife is dissatisfied, so he keeps going out to catch more stuff, and every time she wants more. So I think they are trying to say something with this. It's not a mistake. It's very like on purpose. This is what this book is about, that like people are dissatisfied with their lots in life, and so then they get into situations. I'm just speculating, I've only seen one episode, but your desires will lead you to danger or mistakes or like repeating of the past. But people aren't satisfied with what they have. That's human nature. Okay, so the astrolabe, he goes out. First, he went out to go get some gold. That didn't work. So now he has this astrolabe. This does work because he finds a ship, and finding the ship helps him to find the ocean. So they find the ocean at last when they weren't looking for it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, he totally went all in on like discovering and being like a scientist and going out and like leaving his family for like these journeys. He went all in on that. He loved it. And then, finding that old galleon. Is that how you say it? Galleon?
Yeah, I think so.
Must have been super cool to find that and then like know you're right there by the sea. He was so sure of it. And this is another reminder, like, here is where I wrote that the music, I wanted to give a shout out to that, because at this moment, like, the music is really doing its justice here. I think the scenery of this show, like, I think I've told you this before, like a lot of times a show needs to be more to me than like pretty faces and cool scenery. I think this show succeeds because it does have pretty faces and cool scenery, but it also has like, a neat story and a fun family. And we're here at the sea. It's fun. Yeah. I'm excited.
So based on this discovery, Jose goes back to his wife and says, Macondo is surrounded by water. So somehow he gets from like, we found the ocean to we're actually an island, he's
got the maps and the charts. Yeah.
He's got the maps. Yeah. So he's like, I'm going to keep exploring and finding more. And Ursula says, please don't leave us.
Yeah.
You can't keep leaving us like this. Like, she makes her desires known, which, is going to cause probably to them to butt heads.
Yeah, perhaps so. I think my next note here is about the child that they have next. So that tells me, since I don't have any notes, I didn't really have any anything to go over in that respect. Mm-hmm. Did you have any more you wanted to add before we go on to the next baby?
No. So she hears the baby inside of her crying.
I love this. Yeah, I really love this a lot.
Okay, well, tell me why you love it, because to me, it was weird and uncomfortable. So go ahead.
Okay, yeah, it was weird and it was uncomfortable. Hearing because that's something that you don't normally hear, a baby crying inside of its mother. And she brings her husband over and it's crying inside there. And then when the baby comes out, it ceases to cry. So it was like crying to come out of its womb. But now that it's out of the womb, it's crying no more. And in fact, it takes in all of its surroundings, with its big eyes. So I don't know, that baby was definitely ready to come out. And, I've experienced a pregnant wife and like be able to feel the baby kick and stuff like that. And sometimes you can put your head up to the belly and you can hear things happening, but you never, ever hear crying. That's something that never happens. So to see it, on the show like this, I really enjoyed it. And when I saw it the second time, that's when I was like, I just love this imagery. I did love it. You did not. You thought it was uncomfortable and disturbing.
I just didn't understand. I guess I didn't understand the purpose of it and what it like why it's in there. Obviously it's not realistic. You're not
Yeah.
going to hear a baby inside a womb. So just like Prudencio, he shows up because there's a level of guilt. The only thing I could get out of this is, Ursula took this as a sign that, oh, it's going to have a pigtail again. Surely because this baby's crying, it's going to somehow be I'm trying to think of the word now. It starts with a D, but it's not. It's going to be like a bad thing. It's going to be like something bad that comes out, or that this baby's in pain. So, but it might also be related to the fact that she asks Jose, like, don't keep leaving us. We need you. Like maybe she just feels alone. And
Mm,
so the baby does not have a pigtail.
no.
And we have Aureliano, who's the first baby born in Macondo. His eyes are
Hmm.
wide open and he has premonitions. Like he
Hmm.
can see things that are going to happen in the future. He says the pot will fall, and mom says, no, the pot is fine, but the pot does fall. So, and we're
That's right.
almost here at the end here. But did you want to say anything about Aureliano before we move to the end?
Of course, this is our guy. This is the guy we saw at the beginning with the mustache that's facing the firing squad. This is his birth. So we know now that, not only did his parents go through these big travels, but he was the first human that was born in his village of
Mm-hmm.
Macondo, which is a pretty symbolic person to be, like the first natural born person of your village. And I said before that this show encompasses, like, the episode that we're watching encompasses about 4 or 5 years, but it's more than that because we see our little Aureliano, have a premonition. He appears to be about 5 years old with his big wide eyes, which means that his older brother is probably about 8 or 9. So we have already traveled about 10 years in time from the beginning of our story. When Aureliano is about 6 years old is when we stop our story here. But yeah, this whole episode was building up to him, and I think that when we see his premonition, we get a call back to him being in front of the firing squad, and then our episode ends. Is that correct?
Yeah, they talk about something about a sign, that he always thought there would be a sign, and the sign had yet to come. As he's standing in front of the firing squad, he says the sign has not yet come that he was expecting.
Okay. All right. So that was a very abrupt ending
Mm-hmm.
for us verbally, but it was also abrupt for anybody watching this episode. Like I keep saying, like, get ready to see this, get ready to see that, get ready for some abrupt endings of these episodes. I
Mm-hmm.
think they want you to binge it, and that's why they end the episodes this way. And Heather fell prey to that. She would see the end of these episodes and refuse to stop. She would want to keep going to see what would happen. Did this compel you to want to keep watching? Like, if let's have a pretend land here and like we're not podcasting this show. This show is just another show on Netflix that you're watching while you're hanging out at your folks' house. After watching one episode, would you continue watching?
Yeah, I mean, like I had told you before, that it's not like the kind of show that's like, oh, I'm so gripped, but yet I kind of would say, I at least want to see what happens next, because, you started with this guy at the firing squad and he's very compelling, but we don't really see anything about him until the end. So you're like, the sign had yet to come. What sign are we talking about? Maybe I'll find out in the next episode. But that's how
Mm-hmm.
these episodic programs are meant. There's also the serials. They always leave you with a little of a cliffhanger, so you just know you're going to tune in next week. You don't necessarily plan that you're going to tune in next week for the next 2 years. So is it necessarily at this point interesting enough that I would say I'm going to finish the show? I would say for me personally, no, but I would say I'd like to see what happens next, because I'm wondering, is this gypsy, is Melquiades, is he really a villain or not? Like, does he
Mm-hmm.
have something up his sleeve?
Mm-hmm.
What's up with this Aureliano? Is he going to have more premonitions? What are they going to
Yeah.
be? So I think, in that way, that's interesting. They're kids and what they'll become. I don't find Jose Arcadio as a character. He's charismatic, but in a way, he's also like, I don't know, in a way, he's not that interesting either, because he just like seems like a typical machismo guy. Act first, think later, sort of prideful. But yeah, it's like, it's enough that I would keep going at this point.
That's enough as it is. I mean, From my perspective, I mean, you may already know this about me. I'm kind of a TV snob in a way. I don't like sitcoms. I don't like reality shows. If something seems even a slight bit off, if I smell something weird, I won't keep going with the show. And Heather and myself are running out of shows to watch. And just recently, we've watched episode 1 of The Diplomat, episode 1 of Black Doves, episode 1 of Slow Horses, episode 1 of, I can't think of the name of it, Monkey something or another. And we did not feel compelled to watch episode 2 of any of those shows. Heather immediately wanted to watch more of this and was taking notes immediately. So for me, that tells me something, that there's all these prestige television shows starring Keira Knightley and Gary Oldman, which are very well done, but they're not drawing our attention and wanting us to keep going with it. They're not giving us a sense of, wonder. And I think this show has succeeded, at least in my family.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you were down to do it. I mean, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And we're getting to the end of the episode now, right? Mm-hmm. We're gonna at the end of our podcast episode now. Is it time where I can start doing almost a dismount, almost, Lindsey?
Sure, I think so.
Because I wanted to say that we've been doing bi-weekly episodes with Time Bandits. We wanted to spread that experience out. I believe we're going to be doing weekly episodes of this. This is what we agreed on. Is that correct, Lindsey?
I think we were going to try it, although, with the holidays coming up, we might be there might be a slight delay.
People listening to this episode, they're listening right now and they're saying, it's January 7th. The holidays have already happened. So my plan is for us to do this weekly and release episodes weekly. Reason being is because Wheel of Time season 3 starts up in March. And that would kind of work perfectly. If we had 8 weeks, we could probably miss a week here or there. And if we do, don't kill us. That's when you can write into sweetshotoftimepod@gmail.com and you can be very mad at me. That's fine. I'll take it. We might miss a week here or there. But our plan is to be weekly, at least for the first half of 2025. We'll be bringing you these 100 Years of Solitude episodes, followed by, Wheel of Time in March. And if you're listening to this on Lindsey's feed, you got a different schedule you're looking at. You're probably listening to some Lindsey's movie stuff, and she's probably talking about awards and things like that around January. But we'll be doing this. Our plan is weekly. So, keep tuning in. And since we're doing plugs and I'm telling you what to do, listen to me and Lindsey's music. We record music under both of our names, Introvoid and Lindsey Dunn. Take your pick. Listen to either one. We don't mind. We've done about 4 songs together by now, and they're all on Spotify. So check us out, either Introvoid or Lindsey Dunn. And that's what I got to say for the end of this episode. Lindsey, how about you?
I haven't really done anything since, we did his 3 daughters together. And then I did a Cobra Kai sort of wrap up from part 2 of the season. But I haven't done much podcasting in a while because I'm still in Indiana taking care of my parents. But I do plan to release on oneofmystories.com, hoping to have my best movies of the year list. And I'll be also announcing when the NC Film Critics, choose their winners. We already chose the Southeastern Film Critics. Those have already been announced, but I haven't found the article to do anything with that yet. But when the NC Film Critics noms and winners are up, I'll be announcing those as well. But it's been quiet over on One of My Stories right now. But that's all I have to say. And yes, thanks for the plug about the music, Steve. There are several Lindsey Dunn, so just look for the one wearing the flower crown.
Yes, the one from Midsummer. That's the Lindsey Dunn we want.
And it's EY, LANDSEY, not AY. So just make sure you put that spelling in correctly.
Or just click on my link in the show notes so you can get there that way as well. We always got links. Well, thanks for joining us on this, and we'll be seeing you next time with episode 2. This episode 1 was called Macondo. We never said that. We just did. So I guess, Lindsey, we're going to be heading out of here. So until next week, I hope you always find water and shade and still shoes.
I hope you find water, shade, and the ocean when you need to find it, and that you're not wandering around for 2 to 3 years.
Thank you for that blessing. Bye.
Bye.